The winter of 2026 had barely settled over the British Isles when the first cracks in the icy facade of the monarchy began to splinter into chasms. For the Prince of Wales, the year did not begin with the quiet reflection of a new start, but with the jarring slam of a gavel echoing from across the Atlantic. The United States Justice Department had unsealed over 3 million pages of documents related to the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein, and the ensuing fallout promised to be the biggest challenge to the House of Windsor since the death of the Queen. The name that leapt from the newly unredacted files, poisoning the air around Buckingham Palace, was that of his uncle, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Inside the walls of Adelaide Cottage, the Windsor home the Prince and Princess of Wales had chosen for its relative normalcy for their children, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The documents alleged that in 2010, Andrew had shared confidential reports on trade and investment opportunities in Afghanistan with Epstein, a convicted sex offender. The revelation was not just a family embarrassment, it was a potential criminal matter regarding misconduct in public office. For William, the news was a sickening punch to the gut. It felt like a ghost from a past he was desperate to bury had clawed its way back to the surface, dragging the entire family's reputation into the mud. The couple's response, however, was swift and, by royal standards, unprecedented. While the King and Queen Camilla issued a carefully worded statement of concern, Kensington Palace released its own declaration, signed by William and Catherine. It stated plainly that they were deeply concerned by the revelations, a phrase deliberately chosen to signal their moral distance from Andrew's alleged actions. It was the first time the Prince and Princess had ever issued a statement specifically regarding the scandal, and it was a clear signal to the British public. They were on the side of the victims, not the institution. But as William sat in his study, the weight of the crown already feeling heavy on his brow, he knew a press release was not a shield. The storm was only just beginning to gather on the horizon. Weeks later, the storm clouds broke over the deserts of Saudi Arabia. Prince William touched down in Riyadh for a diplomatic visit intended to foster ties and discuss climate initiatives, and the very issues he had championed with his Earthshot prize. Dressed in a dark suit, he moved through the gleaming halls of a stadium, surrounded by Saudi officials and women footballers. The scene was one of controlled, progressive modernity. Then a voice cut through the carefully managed bubble. "Sir! Sir! To what extent do you think the royal family has done enough around the Andrew and Epstein issue?" The question, thrown at him by a reporter, hung in the air. The cameras captured every second of his response, or rather his lack of one. William's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He did not turn. He did not acknowledge the question. He simply kept walking, continuing his conversation with a Saudi official, as if the man did not exist. To the public watching at home, it looked like a stone wall, a moment of the old royal arrogance. But those who knew the man saw something else, a soldier on a mission, refusing to be drawn into a firefight he could not win. He was not there to defend his uncle. He was there to represent his future kingdom. To stop and answer would have given the reporter exactly what he wanted, a soundbite that would dominate the news cycle, turning a trade mission into a crisis management session. Yet, as he climbed back into the armored car, the silence in the vehicle was deafening. He had taken a hit, not to his body, but to his spirit. The world was no longer interested in his environmental work. They wanted to talk about the past. They wanted to talk about Andrew. And the memory of that shouted question followed him all the way back to the United Kingdom, a constant ringing in his ears. And the spring brought with it the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey, a date on the calendar that usually symbolized unity and tradition. For King Charles, Queen Camilla, William, and Catherine, it was supposed to be a moment of steady continuity. But as their cars pulled up to the Abbey, they were met not by the usual respectful crowds, but by a wall of yellow placards and the piercing sound of boos. Anti-monarchy protesters from the group Republic had gathered in force. "Not my king," the signs read, but it was the chant that cut the deepest. "Charles, what do you know?" they yelled. "Charles, what do you know?" The king, trained in a lifetime of duty, kept his eyes forward, offering a tight smile. Beside him, Kate looked radiant but guarded. William, walking just behind his father, felt his blood run cold. The accusation was no longer just about Andrew. It was now a direct challenge to his father's integrity. As they entered the sanctuary of the abbey, a place where he had prayed at his grandfather's funeral and celebrated his grandmother's jubilee, William found himself standing next to his aunt, the Princess Royal. Princess Anne, the epitome of stoic duty, was a safe harbor in the chaos. A lip reader later revealed the exchange that passed between them. Leaning in, away from the cameras, William whispered a confession of pure exhaustion. "I've had enough of hearing his name, to be honest," he told her. It was a moment of raw vulnerability. For months, he had been the future king, the strong son, the supportive husband. In that moment with Anne, he was just a nephew tired of a scandal he didn't create, and tired of defending an institution his uncle had soiled. Anne, who knew a thing or two about weathering royal storms, likely offered a look of solidarity. But outside, the chanting continued. The BBC, for the first time in 37 years, decided not to broadcast the service, a snub that signaled the establishment was wavering. The family was no longer just dealing with a tabloid scandal. They were facing a crisis of relevance. Just as the family tried to regroup, the scandal took a sharp personal turn that landed directly on William's desk. The anti-monarchy group Republic, sensing blood in the water, had done its homework. They filed a formal complaint with the Charity Commission regarding William's proudest achievement, the Earthshot Prize. The issue was money, specifically money from DP World, a founding partner of the prize. The company's chairman, Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, had been named in the unsealed Epstein documents. The emails were deeply disturbing, containing references to a torture video and sexually explicit misogynistic banter with Epstein. The revelation that a man implicated in such correspondence was a key donor to William's environmental charity was a public relations nightmare. Republic's CEO, Graham Smith, was direct in his accusation. He demanded an investigation, arguing that the charity was tainted by its association. For William, this was a body blow. The Earthshot Prize was his. It was the project that defined his kingship, optimistic, global, and forward-looking. It was meant to be the antidote to the dusty, scandal-ridden past. Now that past had reached out and grabbed his future by the throat. In the privacy of his office, but the frustration was palpable. He had spent years building something clean, something good, only to have it dragged through the mud of a man he had never met because of a connection to an uncle he wished he could forget. The pressure was no longer external. It was now eating away at his legacy from the inside. As the legal net tightened around Andrew, reports confirmed he had been arrested by Thames Valley Police on suspicion of misconduct in public office. The human cost of the scandal began to show in a different part of the family. Across the Windsor estate, in the shadow of the scandal, sat Royal Lodge. It was the home of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, and by extension, a haven for their daughters, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie. The girls had always been popular figures, yet seen as the normal royals who held down jobs and navigated the tricky waters of being titled but non-working royals. But the stain of the Epstein scandal was indelible. Rumors began to swirl that they would not be invited to Royal Ascot. Royal experts predicted the inevitable. Their titles, their security, and their grace and favor homes were at risk. For William, this was perhaps the cruelest dimension of the crisis. He loved his cousins. They had grown up together, bonded by the unique trauma of losing their parents to divorce and navigating the goldfish bowl of royal life. Now, he was being forced to watch them become collateral damage. The palace line was clear. The monarchy must be slimmed down, and those associated with scandal must be cut loose. It was the logic of a modern institution protecting itself. But to William, it felt like a surgeon's knife, removing healthy tissue to stop the spread of a cancer. He knew that if he was to be king, he had to be ruthless. But as he watched his cousins prepare to lose their homes and their identities, the ruthlessness felt an awful lot like cruelty. Through the darkest days, the anchor that held William steady was Kate. While he raged against the machine, she was the one reminding him of the faces of their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis. In the new, heavily secured family home, Forest Lodge, the 6-mile security perimeter that had angered locals was not about royal ego, but about the stark reality of the threat level they now faced. One evening, after a particularly brutal day of headlines, they sat together watching the news. A pundit was discussing a potential new Netflix series, on a spin-off of The Crown, which would dramatize the Andrew saga. The insider report suggested William was furious and sickened by the prospect of his family's lowest point being packaged as entertainment for a global audience. As the speculation flashed on the screen, Kate took his hand. She didn't need to say anything. The gesture was enough. They had survived cancer scares, public scrutiny, and the relentless pressure of the press. They would survive this. But it required a shift in focus. They couldn't control the past, but they could control their future. They leaned into their work, visiting communities, focusing on their early childhood development initiatives. While the firm burned, they became the firefighters, showing the public the face of the monarchy they wanted to save. By the end of the first quarter of 2026, the dust had not settled, but the picture had become clearer. Prince William stood in the wreckage of a year that was supposed to be about hope, but had become about survival. He had watched his father be publicly booed. He had seen his uncle arrested. He had witnessed his cousins being edged out of the family. He had defended his own charity from accusations of tainted money. But he had also drawn a line. He had publicly stated his concern for victims. He had remained silent in the face of provocation, prioritizing duty over ego. He had held his family together. The story of Prince William in 2026 was not the story of a king effortlessly ascending a throne. It was the story of a man learning that the crown is not just a symbol of glory, but a target. It is a shield that must be held up, not just to protect oneself, but to protect everyone standing behind it. As the year stretched ahead, the challenges remained. Prince Harry's security battle loomed, a constant reminder of the brother he had lost. The legal proceedings against Andrew threatened to drag on for months. Yet through it all, the man once known as the Spare had fully inhabited the role of the heir. He had learned that being a future king in a modern world means accepting that you cannot silence the storm. You can only learn to walk through it, head held high with your family by your side, hoping that on the other side there is still a kingdom worth ruling. The royal guards had not just been there to shield him from physical harm. They were the metaphor for the walls he had built around his own heart, walls necessary to survive a year that tried to tear his family apart.